Welcome back to the Global Glory Chasers podcast. Join us today for an adventure feasting on the glory of God. I am hosting conversations here with artists, chefs, authors, teachers, and others all about food, books, and travel, and how those are shaped by our faith. So if you are interested in seeing the Imago Dei, the image of God, in the people and cultures of the world, these conversations hopefully will guide you and inspire you. And I hope that you will subscribe over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or even on YouTube so that you can get all of the episodes as they drop each Wednesday. Today, my guest is my dear friend, Anna Watson-Carl. She is the author of The Yellow Table, A Celebration of Everyday Gatherings, which is a beautiful cookbook that I own and I treasure in my own home. She's also the co-author of The Cook's Atelier. Today, Anna lives in Nashville, Tennessee, with her husband and 2 kids and carries on the tradition of feeding friends and family around the yellow table, which now lives in her home. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the episode. She writes the Yellow Table Weekly, which is a newsletter over on Substack, and she teaches regular cooking classes. Her newest project, which we'll also talk about today, is the Yellow Table Café, which is slated to open this year. I am so excited to get in the kitchen with my friend Anna today. Anna, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your season of life.
Hi, I'm just so happy to be with you, Dorina, and I'm already feel inspired just about the intro of your podcast of combining food, travel, books, and faith, which are all my favorite things. Thank you for having me. This was very fun. My season of life is very busy. Like you mentioned, I've got 2 little ones, 6 and 8, Evie and Grayson. Married to Brandon. We live in Nashville. And I'm from Nashville originally, but moved back here with my family. Gosh, it's coming up on almost 7 years, which is hard to believe. We're at 6.5 right now that we've been in Nashville. And I've been juggling a lot of different food projects for a while. I've worked as a private chef, catering events, and also writing my blog and my newsletter, and currently working on opening my cafe. So yeah, it's a very full season. And we just finished a home renovation. So it just feels like everything all at once. A lot of things.
Oh, girl, you are in the thick of it. I have to tell our audience. So I had the privilege of getting to visit Anna this summer in Nashville. I was there in June, and I got to get a little sneak peek of the location for her cafe, which we'll talk about in a moment. But you are in the trenches. You are in the season of life, and all of the things that God has you doing in this season are so beautiful. Mm-hmm. I want to kind of bring people back to maybe what I'll call the origin story. How would you describe your cultural heritage and the family that you grew up in?
So cultural heritage, not maybe super exciting. I mean, we're like English, Scottish roots. But I grew up in a family with my 2 parents and 2 siblings. So there's 3 of us and five in our family total. But my parents have always loved travel so much and loved not just the travel aspect, but getting to connect with people from other cultures. A big aspect of our childhood was gathering around the yellow table. So the whole yellow table was my physical table I grew up eating around. My mom has this amazing sense of hospitality. And one of the ways they would host people was not only our friends and extended family and neighbors, but they would regularly sign up to host international students at Vanderbilt or Belmont, different colleges in Nashville. And so we always had, from a young age, different international students. And we also had several French exchange students, which truly was like changed the course of my life, because that's what got me excited about France. Just hearing their language, trying their food, hearing about their family. And I just think that's the coolest thing. One of the best things they did was just bringing the world to us in our home, which then, I just had this desire from a young age to get to know other cultures. But I remember specifically a girl from Japan, a guy from England, like I said, France, India, a guy from India. Just, it was great. They would always cook. We would always share foods with each other. And then they also took us from a young age to Belize, to do a family mission trip one Christmas. And we got to just connect with that culture and food. And yeah, I appreciate that about my parents.
Love that your parents helped to instill that love for culture and food in you. And then even the people that you got to meet through the international community. Now, I know that you decided then to go to France for culinary school, and I would love for you to share a little bit more about that experience with our audience.
Yes. Well, and I went and lived in France actually far before culinary school. I ended up majoring, one of my majors in college was French. And so I studied abroad during college, did a semester in Paris, lived with this is another cool story. One of the girls that had lived with our family, I then lived with her family when I did my study abroad. So that was really special. And she to this day is like my French sister. I just recently took my family, my kids and husband to go visit her family in Saint-Malo, France in March. So our kids were hanging out. I was like, we have known each other since she was 14, which is wild. So that's just special. I also then went back and taught English in Paris after college, also nannied for a family and spent another 6 months in Aix-en-Provence. I was just like determined to figure out how to live in France. I just loved it so much. And eventually came back to the States, worked, and then went back to culinary school in 2006. So that time I was in Burgundy and it was, an incredible experience living at an actual chateau, which is where it was called La Varenne, and lived there. I was doing a work study program. So I was working for the woman who ran the place, helping her on, do assistant work on a cookbook, cooking meals for guests, and then also taking the classes. And then I finished that off with a stage in Paris at a French restaurant where I was definitely the only American, definitely the only woman in this like French, like classic kitchen situation. I learned how to, like debone ducks and, do all sorts of like very elaborate French cooking processes.
Oh my goodness. I love it. Well, I remember that I met you on this retreat in Idaho, Priest Lake, Idaho, and we were in another kitchen
Mhm.
and we were connecting in that way. And then for that retreat, I was the chef for the retreat. You were getting poured into and part of the mastermind group for the Open Door Sisterhood. And then all of a sudden you started talking about culinary school in France, which is like to me so dreamy. And I was like, wait, we have a French trained chef in the house with us. I was just like so delighted by the whole thing. And then my family actually got to go to France this past
I
summer for the
know.
Olympics.
So cool. I followed your journey on Instagram, all your pictures, all that. Like it just looked so joyful. Like that's the best word I could describe. I'm sure there were hard moments behind the scenes, but it really looked like you guys were just soaking up every moment.
Well, we definitely were. And, we talk about that more in episode 1. So if listeners want to hear more about our experience with the Olympics, but one of the things I'll mention that we did in Paris and partly inspired by some conversations I've had with you is that we took time to do a little cooking class. It was just like a 1 day
Yes.
cooking class, but just giving us a little window into Parisian culture, getting to meet a local chef. And I love that your experience of being able to travel abroad and even connecting with your French French exchange sister has really informed you and the type of cooking that you do and even the yellow table.
Mhm.
So I want to talk a little bit about that. The yellow table is definitely like the centerpiece or that anchor of what you do. And talk a little bit more about where that concept came from and how it has shaped you as a chef.
So it's based around, I guess, this feeling that was so central to my childhood of community and connectedness because the yellow table, which is like, yellow is almost like the wrong word. It's like this pink Tuscan, like golden yellow. It's not like a, mustard out of the squeeze bottle yellow. It's really like this, like Provence Tuscan, think that European yellow. But it was in the center of our kitchen. So we were not only eating all of our meals around it, which my mom did such a great job of. We had breakfast and lunch or breakfast and dinner every single day. We obviously were at school most lunches, but it was like how we came together and connected and then went off into the world and then came back and connected. And it was, and then even in between meals, we were like, doing homework or games. Like it was really the center of the home. That left such a strong impression on me as I left the home and went out into the world and had this desire to gather people because that's how I grew up. That's how we connected with people, was around the table. And so my mom, knowing how special that table was to me, gifted it to me for my college graduation. So she gave it to, at the time was living in Pittsburgh. So it was with me in my first apartment in Pittsburgh. And then from there has traveled with me back to Nashville, where I lived for a couple of years, and then to New York City, where I lived for 11 years. And yeah, it's been in Brooklyn. Brooklyn was part of it. So the table has moved with me to many places back in East Nashville now. So yeah, it really did inform my food career because of course I love cooking and I love the flavors and the combination of all these interesting, like it's an art form for me, but also at the heart of it is that connection and that conversation and that gathering. And it's really a way to draw people in and give them that feeling of belonging and making them feel seen and loved. And so that does extend into my cafe, is wanting to open a place that's more than just my inner circle, but really opening it to the community, where hopefully that same feeling of connectedness and conversation and gathering and slowing down for a minute, that can happen at the cafe.
Okay, so we're chatting about the cafe. Give us a little bit more of the lowdown on the cafe, the details of where it is and why you chose that place.
I mean, it's crazy that I'm even saying out loud that I'm doing this, because it's really been a dream of mine for probably 20 years, but just sort of tucked back in my brain. But like, oh, one day. So I'm like, well, here I am. I'm in the one day. It's actually happening. And it felt a little bit like jumping off a cliff to even do this, because I've never run my own brick and mortar store, restaurant, business like where I'm hiring people. It all feels very intimidating and exciting. But the lowdown on the cafe, I knew I wanted to be in my neighborhood. I live in East Nashville, which is across the river. It's kind of used to be a little bit like edgy, like part of town. I grew up on the west part of Nashville. It was like, don't go to East. But I love East Nashville so much. I love it. Very artistic. It's a much more diverse community. It's thriving. It's like unique. There's a lot of creativity over here, and there's a lot of small business owners, and the community really supports each other. So I felt certain, and also just logistically, I needed to be like 3 minutes from home, school, church. I feel really lucky. Business, like all of that I could walk if I wanted. But the cafe itself is going to be breakfast and lunch. It's going to be very French themed. The centerpiece are going to be cuts, if I were to say it the French way. Americans tend to say crepes, sweet and savory. The savory ones are going to be like they do in France, which is made out of buckwheat flour. They're naturally gluten-free, but they're very crisp. And the buckwheat ones, I don't find that hardly anywhere in the States. I was recently in New York and I found these authentic wheat French. They call them galettes actually in France. So that's the centerpiece, are the selection of seasonal galettes and crepes. And then there'll be really good salads, like with all roasted veggies, grains, depending on what time of year it is. And then soups and fresh baked goods. And then coffee, of course.
It sounds amazing. It's almost lunchtime here in California. So I'm like, oh, I want to go right now. That sounds amazing.
Well, I just always want a good salad or soup for lunch. And usually I'm the one making those things. But every once in a while, if I'm busy working on something else and I haven't made a soup or a salad, I'm like, oh, where can I go? Where can I go? And it's usually hard to find a place that has like what I'm craving or wanting. So I was like, well, I'm just going to have to open my own place. And the specific spot. So as you can see behind me right now, it's stained glass. I'm actually sitting in my co-working space, which is housed in this beautiful old church, but it's a part of a larger complex. So it was like a church built in the 1800s and a school, kind of Sunday school attached to it. My cafe is in this building. And so that's really, really amazing because I'm neighbors with all these other great retailers. I've got this whole co-working community right here who are hungry at lunchtime and there's nowhere to eat around here. So I feel like I've got that built in. And then it's a neighborhood, like a walkable neighborhood. So I really want to a place for people that live right here to walk to come daily.
Love the community feel of this.
Yes.
And, even just that it's like you're inviting people to your table who work alongside you or who are from your neighborhood. It's so beautiful. And I think it really it shows your heart for community and gathering. I know that same heart is in your cookbook, and I would love for people to hear a little bit more about the Yellow Table cookbook, because that was a beautiful and interesting project that you did related to these themes as well. Tell us about that.
Well, the cookbook I did 10 years ago, which is wild that it's already been 10 years. And that was born out of this desire to create something really both beautiful, but also very practical, something that could inspire people to get in their own kitchens and to cook meals, whether it's for their family or friends, but with the end goal to create community around food. And I had worked in New York City for years as a recipe developer, recipe tester. I started my blog, The Yellow Table, in 2011. It was just a place where I could share my own gatherings, ideas for dinner parties. At the time in New York, before I had kids, I was actually hosting all the time, which is funny because, of course, I had a tiny apartment. Everyone in New York, for the most part, has a pretty tiny apartment. And that was really the way that I connected with people in New York. Of course, you can go out and to restaurants and spend a ton of money, but I really loved having people around my yellow table. And so I wanted to give all those tools over the years, whether it was hosting parties for other people, because that was one of my jobs as a private chef, or whether it was the, hundreds and hundreds of dinner parties throwing at my table. I found that many people lacked the confidence or the skills, or really a lot of it time it was confidence to host their own gatherings. So I wanted to create a book that was not only full of really good recipes, but had a lot of practical resources. There's a section in the back that really gets into the nitty gritty of hosting. It also talks a lot about, like, here's some ideas for menus you could combine together. Yeah, I just wanted it to be, I said, I think at the intro of the book, like, I want this book to be like covered with like food splatters and like stained with oil and like have sticky notes in it. And when I go to friends' houses and see that their books look like that, it makes me so happy.
Okay, well, for our viewing audience on YouTube, I have to show. This is my book. This is my Yellow Table cookbook, and I love to put like the different tabs for favorite recipes and just kind of remind myself, like, oh, this is a dessert or an appetizer. And so I have to show you, yes, lots of tabs. You can tell that is well loved, and there's definitely some like grease and butter stains on my version, which means that I'm in the kitchen with it quite a bit.
That makes me so happy.
I'm so glad. And I feel like you're in the kitchen with me just because we have spent time in person and we've talked a lot about food. I also love how you are attentive to some of the special kind of needs of people with diets and with, food sensitivities. Like, one of my favorites is your gluten-free key lime tart that is in the dessert section.
Yes, I like that.
I love key lime, but I love the way also that you model for us how to include like gluten-free stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you also do some cooking classes. You teach cooking classes there in Nashville. So I'm just curious about kind of how that works, where you've taught those classes, and even, do you run into that a lot where people are looking for, say, gluten-free or dairy-free type of recipes?
Yeah, I think more and more that is a need for people. So I definitely like to, if the recipe is not explicitly catered towards a gluten-free or a vegetarian or vegan, I like, even in head notes, offering like suggestions. Here's how you can kind of accommodate. My husband at one point years ago was very, very sick and had an autoimmune condition. And I really got into experimenting quite a bit with cooking just for some of his dietary needs. And it's really carried on because we like to eat really as healthily as possible. So I don't know, it kind of gave me a new sensitivity, I guess, to different needs. But for cooking classes, I love cooking with people. I think it's so fun to gather people in the kitchen and to watch. So most recently, I've taught at a place in Nashville called The Kitchen. If you live in Nashville, you must check it out. It's over in Belmead. It is this phenomenal cooking wares store. It's like, has every cooking tool you can ever dream of, has like a selection of beautiful cheeses and like olive oils and all the fun condiments, and then knives, all the things you would want to cook with. And they have a kitchen in the back that can accommodate up to 12 students. So it feels like it's like this long L-shaped bar and people are sitting or standing behind the counter. And I feel like I'm inviting people into my kitchen. It's not my kitchen, but we all just cook together and chat and everyone eats together. And it always starts out as this group of strangers, other than maybe they come with like a partner or friend. And at the end, everyone's like pouring wine for each other, exchanging numbers. I have had multiple classes where everyone in the class is like planning a dinner party with each other for another night. And I'm like, can I get an invite too? I mean, they're like, I've had repeat clients that come back again and again and again. Will bring like a friend or family member. Some of them are like, please come and cook for our thing. Or it's just fun. It's like, I've loved it so much. So I taught there for about 2 years. I'm taking a little hiatus right now just because I'm in the thick of the Café. Before that, I taught at there was a Viking Culinary Arts Center in Nashville that I used to teach at, and I taught in New York at a variety of places. It's just fun. I love also seeing people come in saying, "Oh, I don't really cook. I don't really know much about it." And then just watching them develop some confidence and tell me, I'm going to make this. I can make this. It's like sometimes they just need that little boost. I'm like, you can. It's not that hard. I just like imparting those skills and then, giving them something they can go home and do for friends or family and yeah, sit around their own table.
That's so fun. And I can understand that too. Like, I have a heart of a developer. I love to see people develop that confidence. Years ago, I hosted something at my house called the Cooking Club.
Fun.
And it was when we first got married. There was a whole group of couples, and there were several of the women who didn't know how to cook. They weren't raised in the kitchen with their moms and grandmas and aunties like I was. And so I quickly discovered there were my foodie friends who really wanted to try fun new recipes. But then there was a group of women who were there because they were like, I don't know how to boil water. I don't know how to cut a tomato, and just so getting to see them. And we did that cooking club for 10 years. It's so wild.
For 10 years.
We did.
That's amazing, Dorina. Wow.
We developed so many cooks over time. And probably one of the biggest compliments to me now is when I go to my friends' houses and they're cooking like one of the recipes that we discovered during that season. We don't do the club anymore just because of kids and different life circumstances. Or maybe they're making one of my favorite recipes. And so I get to sit down at the table and, get to experience it through their culinary now development and confidence, like you said. So there's something so just meaningful about that. And I want to press in a little bit into you and I share a Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, how do you experience God's glory through food?
So many ways. One verse that stands out to me is taste and see that I am good. And I think about that often because God uses food analogies, talking about feasts and talking about like even just the sacraments of bread and wine, that Jesus is compared to his body and blood. Like there's a lot of different food analogies. I mean, even the loaves and fishes. So I think that's cool that God uses these elements that are on the one hand intended to nourish us to make these spiritual comparisons, but also taste and see that I am good. Like that's taking it to the next level of like taste. Like it's like he gave us taste buds to appreciate flavors. And so I feel God's glory. And I'll tell you a place beyond just cooking. What I sense his presence in the kitchen all the time. I sense his presence around the table when I watch people enjoying food and conversation. Also at markets. Oh my goodness. I sense God's glory big time, especially in France. That is one of the reasons I fell so hard for France is that their food markets are unbelievable. It's just like my happy place, just wandering, looking at all the beautiful array of vegetables and fruits, like, and cheeses and breads and the butcher area and the fish and just the beautiful selection of everything. It's so fun. I love it. And yeah, I sense God's glory in his creation and even that creation in the form of a market. It's amazing.
Food markets are just one of my favorite things to do when I'm traveling. We
Totally.
always try to look at what's the local market.
Yes.
I think about some of the markets that I've been in places like Guatemala and like you said, like France and trip to Italy that my husband and I took years ago. Like I just told him like, I need to go to the market. That's where it's at. That's where the local culture is. So I can definitely resonate with that.
Absolutely.
I always like to ask my guests to give us some recommendations. We call them the Global Glory Chasers recommendations. And so since you are a chef and since you've done so much travel, I wonder if you have any favorite items that you like to have in your kitchen or maybe something that is inspired by your travels to the different markets.
For cooking tools, like 4 things come to mind. These are like, if I had to have like 4 things in my kitchen that I grab all the time. One is my Le Creuset Dutch oven. Brandon, my husband, bless him, he got me early on because the first gift he ever gave me when we were dating in 2008 was this Le Creuset Dutch oven. And I still use it many times a week. I mean, it's like that thing is going to last forever and I love it so much. So it's an investment but it's really heavy duty. It's beautiful. They come in lots of colors. So love that. I use it for everything from baking bread to making stews to you can braise stuff in it, soups. I mean, all the things. I love it.
Okay, what color do you have?
I have a red one.
Okay.
I have the oval
Love it.
shape. I don't remember how many quarts, but it's a big one. And then I got a Shun knife this past year, Shun. It's a Japanese knife and it's my favorite knife I've ever had. I love it so much. It's so sharp. It keeps its edge. It makes chopping a pleasure, which is not always the case, but highly recommend that knife. Again, an investment, but to me, I'm not a gadget person in the kitchen. I like to invest in a few like key pieces and then I just keep them like long term. So that's a great knife. The other two tools that are not expensive at all that I use daily are my, can't remember the brand, but I can send it to you. It's everywhere. It's this lemon squeezer, like the big yellow, like the thing that you squeeze like this and it keeps all the seeds. I think OXO makes one, but there's another brand. I think I have a different brand, I think, than that. But yeah, just the like lemon squeezer. Love it. Because I put lemon in just about everything and I hate fishing out the seeds. And then a microplane is also like a must. I use that constantly, whether it's for grating Parmesan, for grating like chocolate on a dessert, you can do like grate ginger or garlic on it. You can grate like nutmeg. I use it for all sorts of things. Zesting, grate lemon and lime zest, orange zest. Yeah.
Ooh, well, thank you for those recommendations. We'll definitely put those in the show notes. And I agree with you. It's kind of like, okay, what's the one knife? What's the one pot? And then the kind of fun gadget thing. But I would highly recommend people get those and we will share Anna's favorites.
Yeah.
Anna, thank you so much for being here on
my
the
goodness.
podcast today.
You're
Such a joy.
It's such a joy for me to talk to you all day long. You just covered like some of my favorite topics. I feel like I could keep going. I'm like, let's go meet up later for coffee and keep talking. I wish if we weren't across the country.
I know. I love it. Well, for friends who may be in Nashville area or maybe visiting Nashville, I know a lot of people go to Nashville for conferences and concerts and whatnot. Definitely go look up the Yellow Table Cafe. We will link her Instagram in our comments as well. And Anna, thank you so much just for gracing us with your conversation and presence today. As I'm thinking about Thanksgiving, I'm also like paging through your Yellow Table cookbook and marking what are some of those recipes that I want to incorporate in my menu. I hope others will check out your cookbook and just sending you big hugs from California.
Thank you so much. Same right back to you, Dorina. This has been a pleasure.
What a delightful conversation we had today with our guest, Anna Watson-Carl. I am going to share with you just a short excerpt from her cookbook, The Yellow Table, which we mentioned. And this gives you a sense of who Anna is, what she was talking about today in our interview, and also of where she is headed with this cookbook, which I highly recommend you getting your hands on. So this is what she says in the introduction. Something magical happens when you gather people around a table to share a meal. They can be old friends or they can be strangers, but a transformation always occurs. Once phones are stowed away and conversation begins, people actually start seeing each other in a way that rarely happens in our overly distracted lives. They slow down enough to really listen. They enjoy eating for the sake of eating. Ideas are swapped and imaginations inspired. I've witnessed it time and time again. As stories are told and wine is sipped, the layers begin to peel away. Guards go down and connections are formed. It's something I will never tire of seeing. At the end of the day, we all want to be known. We want to connect, to tell our story, and to have others listen. We want to be accepted for who we are and to have a safe place to be ourselves. The table, for me, has always been that place. Cooking is deeply important to me, but it's community that I crave. I will happily throw together an impromptu dinner party if it gets people around the table. My life has always revolved around the table. I grew up eating nearly every meal at a yellow wooden table that sat in the center of my family's kitchen. My mom bought the mustard-colored table on a whim back in the mid-70s, never dreaming that it would one day inspire a blog or a book. Growing up, birthdays and holidays were celebrated around this table, and we spent hours upon hours talking about life, telling stories, and laughing. My parents' brother and sister were always there, but inevitably, a few friends or relatives would also join. And when it wasn't being used for a meal, the table was covered with art projects, games, homework, or books. It was the center of our home, a place where we felt known and loved, where ideas were birthed and topics debated, and where we learned what life was all about. So that is just a sneak peek into Anna's cookbook, The Yellow Table, especially as we are going into the season of holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas, New Year's right around the corner. I highly recommend this one. It includes 110 simple and seasonal recipes. And as you heard from Anna today, this book, a lot of the recipes are inspired by some of her travels and her culinary school experience in France. I already have many of these recipes bookmarked and this well-worn cookbook in my kitchen. Friends, thank you so much for joining us today for Season 5, Episode 9 of the Global Glory Chasers podcast, which is made possible and ad-free by generous supporters through my Substack. So you can sign up for my weekly Glorygram, or you can become a paid subscriber to support the podcast over on Substack, DorinaGlorygram.substack.com. We do have that link in the show notes. And I also wanted to mention one more of my books, which is called Cora Cooks Pancit. As we are just closing out Filipino History Month, I would love to recommend that you would check out this book, especially if you have little ones in your home who love to cook. And this is about a little girl named Cora who is learning how to cook a traditional Filipino noodle dish called pancit. And the recipe is also in the back of this children's book. So check out Cora Cooks Pancit, grab a copy of The Yellow Table, and come on back here next Wednesday for our next episode of Global Glory Chasers. Let's chase God's glory together.